So here, in this talk, I'm going to be talking about the nature of reality. And if you're like most people, you've probably never thought much about the nature of reality. If you're like some, you have. If you're like most, you haven't. Because if you're like most, the answer to the question, what is the nature of reality, is obvious. It's probably obvious to you that we're living in a world that's fundamentally made of this stuff called matter. It's obvious that your body is made of matter, that everything that you see and everything you touch is made of matter. That's the rational way of looking at the world. It's the obvious way of looking at the world. Sure, there are other ways of conceiving reality. You could think of life as being a computer simulation. For instance, there are many smart people who think that. But in all likelihood, this ain't no computer simulation. In all likelihood, this is as hard and physical as it seems. And our bodies and everything around us are as temporal as they seem to be. It's obvious, but it may not be true. What if I told you that there was another obvious way of understanding the nature of this? A way that's comparable to the obviousness of the material view? Is it possible? It doesn't seem possible. I mean, what other way of looking at the world could be as obvious as the view that life is fundamentally made of material? There is one. It's a different way of looking at life that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It existed before the material view, believe it or not. And it's just as intuitive. This is the non-obvious, obvious way of looking at the world. This is the transrational way of looking at the world. And in this talk, I'm going to just briefly describe what that is, so you can appreciate and start looking at life through a transrational lens, if you so choose. It's not hard to do. So what is this transrational lens? Transrational lens is the consciousness lens. It concludes, or one concludes by taking this perspective, that we're living in a universe made of consciousness. But before I say what that is, I'm going to first talk about how we come to this wild, ridiculous conclusion, and also what this idea that life is consciousness is saying about reality and why it's so intuitive and obviously not obvious. So, generally speaking, there are two ways that we can understand objectively the nature of our reality. The first is the rational, and the second is the transrational. With the rational, we're looking to understand the nature of reality using our senses and our observation. We look at objects, we can break apart objects into smaller parts and understand it that way. We can understand the behavior of objects, we can understand the relationship of one object to another object. This is the rational way of looking at the world, it's a scientific way of looking at the world, and it's done us well, technologically speaking. Then there's the transrational way of looking at the world. The transrational way is also rational. It's just as rational as the rational way. It's actually perhaps even more rational because, well, you'll see. But the way we get to that perspective is very similar to the rational. We're using objectivity, only instead of looking outwardly, we're looking inwardly at ourselves. And when you understand the nature of reality when looking to yourself, you come to a different conclusion, transrational conclusion. So what is that transrational conclusion? Well, I'll ask you right now, what do you get when you look at yourself? What are you? What are you seeing? Well, is it your body? So yeah, you get your body, but look beyond your body, your physical body. And I'll ask you again, what are you seeing when you're looking at yourself? Your awareness? That's not your awareness. You can't see your awareness, but you're on the right track. So look for something and identify an object that's in between your awareness and in between your body. The answer is your subjective experience. That's the object that you're looking at. That's the way that the transrational perspective looks to understand the nature of reality. It notices that when we look inwardly, we find our subjective experience. And you also notice when you look inwardly that all reality exists within subjective experience. We've never known an objective world outside of our subjective experience. I mean, the objective world may exist, and it does seem to exist, but does it exist outside of our experience? We assume that it does. The rational worldview assumes that it does because it says the world's made of objects. But does it really? Again, we've never experienced an objective reality outside of our experience. So the transrational perspective, the conscious perspective, proposes that, hey, maybe there is no hard physical reality outside of our subjective experience. Maybe the universe is subjective experience. And here we're talking about a universe of interconnected subjective experience. So it's not saying that there's just my subjective experience and your subjective experiences aren't relevant. It's saying that this is more of a collective consciousness, that we're living in a universe of interconnected subjective experience, an intersubjective universe, where what we call objective physical reality is a projection of our consciousness. It's very much like saying that life is a complex dream. I said complex dream because here we're talking about shared forms. So we're talking about a world where we're experiencing what seems to be a hard physical reality. And that paradigm, that way of understanding things is still relevant. But on a deeper level, we're understanding that everything is just made of experience, that everything exists in experience. So the universe isn't actually hard and physical, it's metaphysical. We're living in a metaphysical universe, a very complex dream reality, a universe of interconnected subjective experience. It's been that way our entire lives, and we just haven't known it until now, because we've been convinced by the simplicity and the obviousness of the rational view. We haven't grasped this entire time that we've been looking and studying objects within the context of a dream, not objects of a hard physical reality. And that is the transrational view of reality. Life is interconnected, intersubjective experience. That's what the universe is, and that's what we are a part of. That's what we're living in. It's been that way our entire lives. Now, there is much more to the transrational view than just that. This is the simple description of what the universe is like according to a transrational perspective. We still haven't talked about the source of the universe. We haven't talked about awareness. Those are both very relevant parts of this new paradigm of understanding reality, this new and old paradigm of understanding reality. But there you have it. Life is interconnected, intersubjective experience. We're living in a very complex dream, a simulation, not created by a computer, but by us, by our consciousness. If you're familiar with the materialistic paradigm, you may know that there's this one very difficult problem that we've been unable to solve for the past hundreds, thousands of years. And that's the problem of understanding what consciousness is. So here, when I say the problem of consciousness, I'm referring to our subjective experience. You could also include awareness in that, but here I'm talking about our subjective experience. So the problem that we face with the materialist paradigm is an understanding the difference between reality and our experience of reality. You see, we know that we have these subjective experiences. We know that our experience is being constructed by our brain in some ways. So we know that this really is a type of simulation of a sort. At the same time, we know that, like, intellectually, we still walk around and talk as though we're speaking about the world as though it's objectively real, that we're touching and feeling things that aren't just in our experience, that are hard physical objects. Yet we know that we've been living a world of experience our entire lives. And so with the material paradigm, the big problem is that we can't explain the difference between physical hard reality and our perception of physical hard reality. We suppose that there's a physical hard reality underneath our perception, but that's just an idea. We don't know that it's true. And so long as we continue to go along with the material paradigm, I don't think we ever will be able to reconcile the difference between physical hard reality and our experience of it. This problem, though, doesn't exist in the transrational paradigm, because according to the transrational paradigm, it's the physical hard reality that's more of the illusion. And it still exists, but it's more of an illusion because it's a projection of a consciousness, just like in our dreams. So there's no hard problem in the transrational paradigm, in the consciousness paradigm, because that consciousness is fundamental. Really, first there's awareness, and then there's the intersubjective universe, and then there's our physical bodies and reality existing within the universe. There's a nice little flow from depth to superficial physical experience. At least that's one way of understanding the transrational paradigm. There are many different ways of understanding it. Not everyone who looks at life as consciousness sees it in the same way. But that's the starting point right there. And there's no hard problem with it. There's no glaring inconsistency with it, which is one of the reasons why I like it. I also like it because it's perfectly consistent with science. Because again, all we're doing is just switching our view and describing life in a different way. And because of that, it conserves all scientific information. There's no way that you could design an experiment, as far as I'm aware of, that could disprove the idea that we're living in a very complex dream, because there's a material component to the consciousness worldview. So there you have it, right there. That's it. That's the transrational view of reality. It says that we're living in a universe of consciousness, that we've been living in a complex dream reality, an intersubjective universe, our entire lives and just haven't known it. This is the paradigmatic paradigm shift. And if we start looking at life this way, a lot can change. And this would be revolutionary in so many different areas, both culturally and personally. And I'm going to explore some of those areas with you in this YouTube channel, which is one of the reasons why I created this YouTube channel on the Transrational universe. Because though this view of consciousness has been around for a long time, we haven't thought about it. It's not even in our consciousness, the idea that life is consciousness. So in order for this worldview to become a little more clear and understandable and reasonable and intuitive, we have to apply our objective logical thought towards it and just play around with the idea. What would it mean if we really were living in a complex dream? I'll leave that question to you, and I'll see you later.